It was supposed to be just another conversation between two old friends on a podcast. But when JIMIN turned to JUNGKOOK and said he was ready to tell that story, something shifted in the room. His laughter faded. His eyes grew distant. No one knew what he was about to say, not even him, and what JIMIN revealed would move the world in a way no one could forget. The intimate podcast studio hums with a quiet energy of two old friends settling into conversation. Soft lighting creates warm shadows across the minimalist setup, where JIMIN and JUNGKOOK sit across from each other in what was supposed to be a lighthearted promotional interview for their upcoming joint music project. The familiar red recording light glows steadily, capturing every word for the millions of listeners who tune in expecting typical entertainment stories and career reflections. JIMIN sits comfortably in his chair, wearing his characteristic simple black t-shirt and jeans, his soft, blonde hair falling naturally around his face. JUNGKOOK, radiant as always, fidgets slightly with his water bottle, his usual animated energy subdued by something unspoken in the air. There's something different about both of them today, a contemplative quality that goes beyond their usual thoughtful banter. Their eyes occasionally meet with the shared weight of a story that has never been told publicly. You know, people always ask us about the dance routines, the chemistry, the fun we had on stage, JIMIN says, his voice carrying that familiar, gentle warmth that has made him beloved by millions. But there are moments in friendship that change you in ways that have nothing to do with performances or lyrics. JUNGKOOK nods knowingly, his eyes softening as he seems to understand exactly where this conversation is heading. JUNGKOOK, he begins gently, a note of both affection and concern in his voice. JIMIN pauses, his fingers absently turning a coffee cup that has grown cold during their discussion. The silence stretches for a moment, not uncomfortable, but pregnant with the weight of memories that are clearly close to the surface. JUNGKOOK watches him with the patience of someone who has witnessed his careful consideration of words many times before. JUNGKOOK, you saved my life once, JIMIN says suddenly, the words cutting through the intimate atmosphere like a gentle blade. And I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for it. JUNGKOOK's eyes widened slightly, his usual composure giving way to genuine surprise. JIMIN, what are you doing? He asks softly, but there's no anger in his voice, only concern. Affection. I'm doing something I should have done years ago, JIMIN responds, his voice carrying a reverence that transforms the casual podcast atmosphere into something more sacred, more meaningful. I'm telling the world about the most generous act of friendship I've ever witnessed. The podcast studio suddenly feels smaller, more intimate, as if the walls themselves are leaning in to hear what's about to be shared. JUNGKOOK shifts in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with being the subject of praise, but there's something in JIMIN's demeanor that tells him this moment is important. This isn't a K-pop story, JIMIN continues, his hands now still around the coffee cup. This isn't about awards or fan meetings or the glamorous side of the industry that people imagine. This is about a moment when someone showed up for another human being in a way that... He pauses, looking directly at JUNGKOOK with eyes full of gratitude and emotion. In a way that restored my faith in people. The words hang in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history and emotion. JUNGKOOK's eyes begin to glisten with unshed tears as he realizes what story JIMIN is preparing to tell, a story he probably hoped would remain private forever. We were on tour, JIMIN begins, then stops himself. Actually, no, this wasn't during the tour. This was years later, after we'd both moved on to other things. I was going through. He hesitates, the vulnerability clear in his expression as he glances at JUNGKOOK for permission to continue. JUNGKOOK nods, almost imperceptibly, his own vulnerability showing as he prepares to hear his private act of kindness exposed to the world. I was going through the darkest period of my life, JIMIN continues, his voice growing softer. The admission hangs heavy in the small studio space. Jimin, the man who has become synonymous with elegance and strength, is preparing to reveal a moment of profound vulnerability. JUNGKOOK reaches across the small space between their chairs and gently touches his hand, a gesture of support that speaks to decades of deep friendship. Most people know about some of the tragedies I've faced, Jimin continues, his voice growing softer. The loss of my brother, the pressure of the industry, my father leaving when I was young. What they don't know is how close I came to. He stops. The words are clearly difficult to form. How close I came to giving up entirely. JUNGKOOK squeezes his hand gently, his own eyes now clearly wet with tears. He knows this story intimately, but hearing Jimin tell it aloud seems to affect him deeply. And that's when JUNGKOOK, Jimin begins, then pauses once more, clearly gathering himself for whatever he's about to reveal. But as he takes a deep breath and prepares to continue his story, something in both their expressions suggests that what he's about to share will challenge everything people think they know about celebrity, friendship, human kindness, and the power of showing up for someone when they need it most. The podcast recording continues, but the atmosphere has shifted into something profound and unrehearsable. It was 2015, Jimin begins, his voice steady but weighted with memory. I had just come off a massive world tour, which should have been the highest point of my career. Everyone saw success, saw this incredible opportunity, saw a future full of possibilities. But inside, he pauses, looking down at his hands. JUNGKOOK leans forward slightly, his protective instincts clearly activated as he watches his friend navigate this difficult territory. His usual vibrant energy has given way to something more subdued, more careful. Inside, I was drowning. Jimin continues. The loss of my older brother, it had broken something in me that success couldn't fix, money couldn't fix, fame couldn't fix. I was walking around like a ghost going through the motions of living, but not really being alive. The raw honesty in his voice creates an almost sacred atmosphere in the podcast studio. This isn't the polished, media-trained version of celebrity vulnerability that audiences are accustomed to. This is something deeper, more authentic. I remember sitting in my apartment one night. Jimin says, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. It was a Tuesday in March, around 2:00 a.m. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, hadn't eaten a real meal in days. I was just empty, completely empty. JUNGKOOK's grip on his hand tightens almost imperceptibly, and there's something in his expression that suggests he knows exactly which night Jimin is talking about. His eyes hold a mixture of pain and protective love that speaks to having witnessed someone he cares about at their absolute lowest point. I had made a decision that night. Jimin continues, the words coming slowly, deliberately. I had reached a point where the pain of existing felt heavier than the unknown of not existing. I know that sounds dramatic, but when you're in that place, when grief and loss and emptiness become your only constant companions, he trails off, the weight of the admission settling over both of them. JUNGKOOK's free hand moves to wipe away a tear that has escaped, despite his efforts to maintain composure. I had written letters, Jimin says simply, to my mother, to my brother, to the few people who mattered. I had made arrangements. I thought I was being responsible about it, methodical. That should have been a warning sign right there. When ending your life starts to feel like just another task to complete. The silence that follows is profound. In a world where celebrity struggles are often sanitized and packaged for public consumption, this level of raw honesty feels almost jarring in its authenticity. And that's when my phone rang. Jimin says, a subtle shift in his tone, suggesting the story is about to turn. At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March 2015, my phone rang, and it was JUNGKOOK. JUNGKOOK's eyes widen slightly, as if he's surprised Jimin remembers the exact time. His expression carries a mixture of love, sadness, and something that might be embarrassment at having his private act of kindness about to be exposed. "You have to understand," Jimin says, looking directly at Jungkook with an expression of profound gratitude. "We weren't in regular contact at that point. We'd trained together years earlier. BTS had been huge, but we'd each started pursuing our own directions. We'd see each other at award shows, exchange pleasantries, maintain that professional friendship that idols often have. But we weren't calling each other at 2:00 a.m. "Jimin," Jungkook says softly, clearly uncomfortable with where this story is heading. "No, let me tell this," Jimin responds gently but firmly. "Because people need to know what real kindness looks like, what real intuition and care can accomplish." He turns back to address their podcast audience directly, his voice gaining strength as he prepares to reveal what happened next. "Jungkook called me at 2:17 a.m., and the first thing he said was, 'I had a dream about you and I'm worried. Are you okay?' Jimin's voice cracks slightly as he recounts the memory. "Not sorry to wake you. Not this might sound crazy. Just direct concern for my well-being." Jungkook's composure finally breaks and tears begin flowing freely down his cheeks. He seems torn between wanting to stop Jimin from continuing and needing to hear him tell this story that has clearly meant so much to him. "I almost hung up," Jimin admits. "Because in that moment, his timing was so perfect, so impossibly perfect, that it felt like the universe was playing some kind of cosmic joke. Here I was, literally minutes away from making an irreversible decision. And suddenly Jungkook is on my phone asking if I'm okay." The weight of near tragedy and divine timing settles over the studio like a heavy blanket. This isn't just a story about friendship, it's a story about intervention, about the mysterious ways that human connection can literally save lives. "But instead of hanging up," Jimin continues, "I started crying, just completely broke down on the phone with him. And Jungkook, without knowing anything about what I was going through, without understanding the gravity of that moment, just stayed on the line and listened." As Jimin prepares to reveal what happened during that life-changing phone call, the podcast studio feels charged with the understanding that they're about to hear something extraordinary, something that will redefine how people think about the power of intuition, friendship, and showing up for someone in their darkest hour. "But what Jungkook did next," Jimin says, "would prove to be even more remarkable than his perfectly timed phone call. What he did next would save not just my life but transform my understanding of human compassion forever." "I don't remember everything I said to him that night," Jimin continues, his voice gaining a tremor that reveals just how difficult this recounting is for him. "I was in such a dark place, rambling about loss and pain and feeling like I didn't belong in the world anymore. Most people would have tried to talk me out of those feelings, would have offered platitudes or suggested therapy or told me things would get better." Jungkook shifts in his chair, clearly reliving that phone call from his own perspective. His tears have stopped flowing, but his eyes remain red-rimmed and filled with the memory of fear, the fear of almost losing someone he cared about. "But Jungkook didn't do any of those things," Jimin says, looking at him with profound admiration. "He just listened. For over an hour, he just listened to me pour out all the darkness I'd been carrying. And then when I finally ran out of words, when I finally went quiet, he said something that changed everything." The pause stretches between them, heavy with anticipation. Jungkook seems to know exactly what words Jimin is about to quote, and his expression suggests he had no idea at the time how significant those words would become. He said, "Jimin, I'm coming over. Don't go anywhere. Don't do anything. Just wait for me." His voice breaks completely on the last words, the memory clearly overwhelming him even decades later. It was 3:30 in the morning at that point. Jimin continues after collecting himself. Jungkook lived across town. It would have taken him at least 45 minutes in traffic. probably longer at that hour. He had rehearsal the next morning for a solo project. He had every logical reason to handle this with a phone call or to suggest meeting the next day. JUNGKOOK finally speaks, his voice soft but clear. "I've never told anyone this part of the story," he says, addressing their podcast audience directly for the first time. "But when I hung up that phone, I was terrified. I had never heard JIMIN sound like that. There was something in his voice that made me feel like..." He pauses, struggling with the words. "Like if I didn't get to him immediately, I might never see him again." He finishes quietly. The admission hangs in the air like a confession. This wasn't just concern between friends. This was life or death urgency, recognized and acted upon in the middle of the night by someone who trusted his instincts enough to drop everything and respond. "He didn't just come over," JIMIN says, his voice filled with wonder. "Even after all these years, he stopped at an all-night grocery store on the way, bought ingredients for chocolate chip cookies. From scratch, not the pre-made dough. He bought coffee, real coffee beans that needed to be ground. He bought the fixings for a proper breakfast." The specificity of these details clearly matters to JIMIN, each item representing something larger than simple sustenance. JUNGKOOK smiles through his tears, remembering the late-night shopping trip that must have seemed surreal even to him. "I showed up at his apartment at 4:45 a.m., JUNGKOOK adds, with bags of groceries and no plan except to not leave him alone. He rang the doorbell. JIMIN continues, "And when I opened the door, he took one look at me and just..." He pauses, the memory clearly vivid and emotional. "Just what?" JUNGKOOK prompts gently, as if he needs to hear JIMIN's version of what he remembers doing. "Just hugged me," JIMIN says. "Didn't say a word about how terrible I looked. Didn't ask what was wrong. Didn't try to fix anything. Just held me until I stopped shaking." JIMIN's voice is barely above a whisper now, the intimacy of the memory requiring reverent telling. "And then he walked into my kitchen like he owned the place," JIMIN says with a soft laugh, "and started baking cookies. At 5:00 a.m. The image is simultaneously absurd and beautiful. JUNGKOOK, K-pop megastar, stress, baking chocolate chip cookies in a friend's kitchen at dawn as an act of love and intervention. "For the next 6 hours," JIMIN continues, "JUNGKOOK took over my apartment. He made coffee. He baked cookies. He cooked eggs and bacon and pancakes. He put on music, not sad music, not happy music, just gentle music. He cleaned dishes I hadn't washed in weeks. He opened windows I'd kept closed for months." JUNGKOOK laughs softly, wiping away fresh tears. "I turned into my mom that morning. When I don't know what else to do, I cook. When I'm scared or worried or feeling helpless, I feed people." "But it wasn't just the cooking," JIMIN says urgently, as if he needs people to understand the deeper significance. "It was that he transformed my space from a place where I was planning to die into a place that felt like living again. The smell of cookies baking, the sound of normal life happening, the simple act of sharing a meal with someone who cared enough to show up." His voice trails off as he struggles to articulate something that clearly defies easy explanation. "He saved my life that night," JIMIN says simply. "Not through words or therapy or intervention in any traditional sense. He saved my life by showing me that I still belonged in the world of the living." But as JIMIN prepares to reveal what happened during the rest of that transformative morning, it becomes clear that JUNGKOOK's rescue mission was just the beginning of something even more extraordinary. What he did over the following weeks, JIMIN says, would prove that true friendship isn't just about showing up once, it's about consistently choosing to see and value someone when they can't see or value themselves. "The thing about that morning," JIMIN continues, his voice steadier now, but still heavy with emotion, "was that JUNGKOOK didn't try to fix me. He didn't offer solutions or advice or tell me everything was going to be okay. He just existed alongside me in that dark space and made it feel less dark. Jungkook nods knowingly, his own memories of that time clearly vivid. I remember thinking that morning, he says, that grief looks different on everyone. But isolation makes it worse for everybody. I couldn't take away what you were feeling, but I could make sure you weren't feeling it alone. The wisdom in his words speaks to an understanding of loss that goes beyond what most people his age would possess. It's clear that Jungkook's response came from his own experiences with pain and his own understanding of what healing actually requires. After that night, JIMIN says, I thought it would go back to normal, that Jungkook would return to his life. I would return to mine, and we'd maybe exchange awkward thank you notes or something. He pauses, looking at Jungkook with renewed amazement. But Jungkook had other plans. I started what I called the Tuesday Project. Jungkook admits, his cheeks flushing slightly with embarrassment. Every Tuesday, for the next 6 months, I would show up at JIMIN's apartment, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with movies, sometimes just to sit in his garden and not talk. The systematic nature of his intervention speaks to something deeper than impulsive kindness. This was a deliberate, sustained campaign to ensure that JIMIN didn't slip back into the darkness that had nearly claimed him. He never called ahead, JIMIN adds with a fond smile. Just showed up every Tuesday like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes I wouldn't answer the door, and he'd just sit on my porch for hours, reading or working on music, letting me know, through his presence, that someone cared whether I lived or died. The image of Jungkook camping out on someone's porch as an act of love paints a picture of friendship that transcends typical celebrity relationships. This wasn't about networking or fan service. This was about human connection in its purest form. There were Tuesdays when I was angry, JIMIN admits, when I resented his intrusion, when I wanted to wallow in my pain without witness. I'd tell him to leave, that I didn't need his help, that I wanted to be alone. And I'd leave, Jungkook interjects, but only after making sure there was food in his refrigerator and something growing in his garden. I'd plant flowers or herbs, something that would need tending, something that would give him a reason to get up the next day. The tactical psychology of his approach is remarkable in its sophistication. Rather than forcing interaction or demanding progress, Jungkook created gentle structures that encouraged life without demanding it. The turning point, JIMIN says, his voice gaining strength, came on a Tuesday in August. I'd been having a particularly difficult week, missing my brother intensely, feeling like the grief would never lessen. Jungkook showed up with paint. House paint? JIMIN clarifies with a grin. Bright, ridiculous colors, Jungkook laughs. Sunshine yellow and ocean blue and forest green. I told him we were repainting his living room, whether he liked it or not. I thought he had lost his mind. JIMIN laughs, the sound genuine and warm. Here I was, barely functional, and Jungkook wanted to redecorate, but I was insistent, Jungkook says. And at that point, arguing with me took more energy than he had. So we painted, JIMIN continues. Badly. We got more paint on ourselves than on the walls. We played music too loud and made a complete mess, and for about 4 hours I forgot to be sad. The simplicity of the breakthrough is almost startling. Not through therapy or medication or profound conversation, but through the basic human act of creating something together, of transforming a space through shared effort and terrible painting technique. When we finished, JIMIN says, and we were sitting on my newly colorful floor, covered in paint and exhausted, I realized I had laughed that day. Really laughed. For the first time in months. And I looked at Jungkook and I said, he pauses, the memory clearly precious to him. Why are you doing this? Why are you here every Tuesday, dealing with my mess, taking care of me when you barely know me anymore? The question hangs between them, and it's clear that Jungkook's answer changed something fundamental in how JIMIN understood friendship, love, and his own worth in the world. But What JUNGKOOK said in that paint-splattered living room, Jimin continues, would not only transform my understanding of human kindness, it would become the foundation for a friendship that would sustain us both through every challenge that followed. JUNGKOOK looked at me for a long moment. Jimin continues, his voice dropping to almost a whisper as he recalls what was clearly a pivotal moment in his life. We were both covered in paint, sitting on the floor of my living room that now looked like a rainbow had exploded in it, and I could see him considering how to answer my question. JUNGKOOK shifts in his chair, clearly knowing exactly which moment Jimin is about to describe. His expression shows both fondness for the memory and discomfort with having his private words about to be shared with the world. He said, Jimin pauses, looking directly at JUNGKOOK as if seeking permission to continue. Because when someone you care about is drowning, you don't ask them why they fell in the water. You just jump in and help them swim. The words land in the podcast studio with the weight of profound truth. JUNGKOOK closes his eyes briefly, as if hearing his own words quoted back to him is almost too much to bear. But then he said something else. Jimin continues, something that completely changed how I understood my place in the world, my responsibility to myself and to others. JUNGKOOK opens his eyes, and they're bright with unshed tears again. He knows what's coming next, and it's clear that even he didn't fully understand the impact of his words at the time. He said, Jimin, the world needs you in it. Not because of what you do or what you achieve or how famous you are. The world needs you because you're you. Because you notice things other people miss. Because you're kind to strangers and you tip cafe staff well and you remember people's names. Because you make the world a little bit gentler just by being in it. JUNGKOOK's composure breaks completely at this point, tears flowing freely as he hears his own words reflected back with the weight they've carried in Jimin's life for over 2 decades. I had never, Jimin says, his own voice thick with emotion. In my entire life, had someone explained my value in the world in terms that had nothing to do with what I could provide or accomplish. JUNGKOOK saw worth in me that was just intrinsic, essential, unchangeable, even by loss or failure or depression. The podcast studio feels sacred now, charged with the recognition that they're witnessing something extraordinary, not just the telling of a story, but the live processing of gratitude that has been building for decades. He continued, Jimin says, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, and if you can't see that right now, if the pain is too loud for you to hear how much you matter, then I'll be your eyes and ears until you can see and hear it yourself. That's what Tuesday is for. JUNGKOOK reaches across and takes both of Jimin's hands in his, their friendship visible and tangible in the gesture. I meant every word, he says simply. I still mean every word. That conversation, Jimin says, sitting on that paint-covered floor in my rainbow living room, was the moment I decided to stay. Not just to not die, but to actually live. To be present for whatever came next, good or bad. The transformation he's describing goes far beyond mere survival. This is about choosing engagement with life. Choosing to believe in possibility even when current evidence suggests otherwise. JUNGKOOK didn't just save my life that night in March, Jimin says, looking directly at him with overwhelming gratitude. He taught me that salvation isn't a one-time event. It's a choice you make every day. And sometimes, you need someone else to hold space for that choice until you're strong enough to make it yourself. The Tuesday project continued for 6 months, JUNGKOOK adds. But really, it never ended. We just stopped calling it that. We started calling it friendship, Jimin says. The evolution from intervention to genuine ongoing relationship speaks to something beautiful about how crisis can transform acquaintanceship into deep, lasting connection. Every person in this world, Jimin says, addressing their podcast audience directly, Every single person deserves to have someone who will show up on Tuesday, someone who will sit with them in their darkness and help them remember what light looks like. As both of them sit in the emotional aftermath of this revelation, it's clear that the story has affected them as much as it will their listeners. The raw honesty, the vulnerability, the demonstration of what love actually looks like when it's not easy or convenient. All of it hangs in the air like a challenge to everyone listening. But there's still more to this story, because what happened after the Tuesday project would prove that the lessons Jungkook taught Jimin about showing up for others would transform not just his personal life, but his entire approach to existence in the world. The most beautiful thing about what Jungkook taught me, Jimin says, his voice now steady and filled with purpose, is that once you understand what it means to truly show up for someone, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to being the kind of person who walks past suffering without stopping. Jungkook smiles through his tears, clearly proud of the man his friend has become and the way he's chosen to honor what he learned during his darkest period. About a year after the Tuesday project ended, Jimin continues, I was at a coffee shop in Seoul, and I noticed this young trainee couldn't have been more than 22, sitting alone at a corner table. He'd been there for hours, just staring at his phone. And there was something about his posture, something about the way he held himself. Jungkook nods knowingly. You recognized the signs? I recognize the signs, Jimin confirms. That particular kind of stillness that comes when you're trying to disappear from the inside out. So I did something that the old me, the pre-Jungkook me, never would have done. The story that follows is clearly one that Jimin has never told publicly before, but the emotion in his voice suggests it holds deep significance for him. I walked over to his table and said, I'm going to get another coffee. Can I buy you one too? Just like that. No introduction, no explanation, just a simple offer of connection. What did he say? Jungkook asks, genuinely curious about this story. He's apparently never heard it. He looked up at me with these eyes that were so familiar. Jimin says, that same empty exhaustion I remembered from my own mirror during those dark months. And he said, I don't really drink coffee. So I said, neither do I usually, but sometimes you need an excuse to sit with another human being. The parallel to Jungkook's late-night grocery run is unmistakable, the same intuitive understanding that sometimes people need practical reasons to accept care. We ended up talking for 3 hours, Jimin continues. His name was Minho, and he had just been dropped by his company, lost a role he'd been counting on, was questioning whether he belonged in this industry at all. Sound familiar? Jungkook laughs softly, recognizing the echo of themes from Jimin's own story. I didn't give him advice or try to solve his problems, Jimin says. I just listened, the way Jungkook had listened to me. And when he was ready to leave, I gave him my number and said, if you need someone to just exist alongside you while you figure things out, call me. The gesture mirrors Jungkook's Tuesday project, but adapted to Jimin's own style and circumstances. He called 2 weeks later, Jimin says. Not because he was in crisis, but because he wanted to thank me for seeing him that day, for treating him like he mattered when he couldn't see his own worth. That's beautiful, Jungkook says, and his pride in Jimin's growth is evident in his voice. But here's the thing. Jimin continues, Minho is now a successful singer, but more importantly, he's become someone who pays attention to other people's pain. Last year, he started a support group for young idols dealing with rejection and industry pressure. He calls it Tuesday Talks. Jungkook's eyes widen with delight at this revelation. He named it after what you taught me. Jimin confirms. That's showing up consistently, without agenda, just because someone matters. That's how you change the world. One Tuesday, one conversation, one act of witnessing at a time. The ripple effect of Jungkook's original intervention is becoming clear, and how one act of profound kindness can multiply exponentially across years and lives. Since then, Jimin says, I've had my own version of the Tuesday Project with dozens of people. Not always idols, not always people in crisis. Sometimes it's a homeless man I see near the practice studio. Sometimes it's a neighbor going through a divorce. Sometimes it's a kid who gets bullied at the park where I walk. JUNGKOOK shakes his head in amazement. You've been doing this for 20 years and never told me? I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel responsible for my choices, JIMIN explains. But also because what you taught me was never supposed to be about you getting credit. It was supposed to be about creating a world where people show up for each other, because that's just what humans do. The philosophy he's describing represents a fundamental shift in how to approach human suffering, not as something to fix or solve, but as something to accompany and witness. Every person I've sat with, JIMIN says, every Tuesday I've spent just being present with someone in pain has been my way of honoring what JUNGKOOK gave me, not just the rescue, but the model of what love actually looks like when it's not convenient or pretty or easy. As their podcast conversation reaches this emotional peak, it's clear that both JIMIN and JUNGKOOK are overwhelmed by the magnitude of what has been shared and what has been created through 20 years of paying kindness forward. But the most powerful part of their story isn't just what happened between them. It's the challenge they're offering to everyone listening, the invitation to become the kind of person who notices suffering and responds with presence rather than solutions. With consistency rather than grand gestures.